Hello folks, I'm Alex, this is Alex Unabridged, and this is the Beauty in Books tag. So welcome back to the channel if that is the case. Yes, another little tag for you today, catching up on my tags. And this is the Beauty in Books tag, which was created by Reuben at To Read As It May Concern and Emily at the Linguist's Library. And I was tagged by the lovely Pat over at Book Chat with Pat. So thank you very much, Pat, for that tag. I will link in the description to everybody else's videos that I've just mentioned, obviously. So do go and have a watch of those. But yes, let's get straight on into the prompts then. So prompt number 1 is beauty in concept. I do like a good, slightly odd concept for a book. And my first pick, I would certainly say, is that. And that is The Minotaur Takes a Cigarette Break by Stephen Sherrill. And this follows the Minotaur from the maze, from the labyrinth, the Minotaur of the Theseus myth, 5,000 years out of the labyrinth, essentially. And we find the Minotaur, known as M, working as a line cook at a steakhouse in the American South, living in a trailer park. He has evolved somewhat over those 5,000 years, psychologically more than physically. He still, is a minotaur physically, but he doesn't eat people anymore. But he's kind of socially inept. He's very lonely, but he has very human needs, and his life descends into chaos over the period of a couple of weeks, and yet within this chaos, he finds kind of the possibilities of love and happiness and, relationships, human relationships. It's quite a strange book, quite a strange concept, but Cheryl's writing is absolutely beautiful. Cheryl's a poet as well as, a fiction writer, and it shows in his prose for sure. But what I love about this is how he uses this kind of quite strange, quite surreal concept. It's magic realism, I would say, this. And he uses this character of the Minotaur and the events of the book to explore alienation, the alienation of sort of outsiders in society. And it's really beautifully done, and the concept just grabbed me immediately. A friend of mine years and years and years ago gave me this because she loved it, and she gave it to me just saying, I love this and I think this would probably be really good for you at this point in your life, and boy was she right. But the concept was what really hooked me in, but it has a lot to say and it's a really beautiful book. Okay, prompt number 2 then is beauty in opening lines, or opening line, whichever you want to go for. I've got a couple here. One of my favourite opening lines in kind of, more recent books that I've read come from Becky Chambers and A Psalm for the Wild Built. It kind of almost has 2 opening lines because there's kind of a prologue-y sort of bit, as well as kind of, the beginning of chapter 1. The prologue opening line, if you like, is, if you ask 6 different monks the question of which godly domain robot consciousness belongs to, you'll get 7 different answers. I like that. But the like proper opening line, if you like, to chapter 1 is, sometimes a person reaches a point in their life when it becomes absolutely essential to get the fuck out of the city. And I love that because it's just something that I relate to massively. And to be fair, the continuing paragraph, which I won't read because it's quite long, is also, it really sets up the book really well. And it certainly for me kind of made me go, yeah, I'm going to love this book. I already know I'm going to love this book, and I did. But I think my absolute favourite opening to a book, it's a classic one. It's one that a lot of people know, and it's held up as kind of a classic opening to a book, is the opening to Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. And I will read the opening sort of paragraph to this. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted, above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. I absolutely love that opening paragraph. I can see why it's held up as a classic opener. I've only read this twice. I read it a long time ago, probably late teens, early 20s. And then I read it again last December. And I had forgotten quite how good that opening is. And immediately, as soon as I read that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in. And I love Ray Bradbury's style anyway. I love Bradbury's rhythm and choice of, words, his vocabulary, things like that. He really just kind of does it for me in terms of the feeling that I get when I read Bradbury's work. So yes, that is my favourite, I think, thus far. Okay, prompt number 3 then is beauty in character. There is one that jumps out at me, because there's some fantastic characters in many of the great books that I've read, but one that really jumps out of me just in terms of richness of character is Feathers. Sophie Feathers from Angela Carter's Nights at the Circus. An absolute masterpiece in magic realism for me. Masterpiece in general, I would say. It is an absolutely phenomenal book. If you haven't read it, I thoroughly recommend it. But Feathers is a fascinating character. She, as I say, she's just so rich. Her way of speaking is brilliant. She can kind of go from this very kind of brash, quite crass sometimes, sort of very working class East End type language, straight into like philosophy and politics, and sort of diatribes, if you like, on the world at large, and suddenly shifts into this incredibly intelligent and well articulated sort of speech, and then goes straight back into sort of the crass stuff again. So yeah, in terms of like the way that she speaks in the book is brilliant. But she's such a great sort of example of female empowerment. She's a character that cannot be contained. She is part woman, part swan, and she is larger than life in so many ways. She runs kind of through a huge sort of gamut of experiences and emotions in the book, and she, for me, is where like the magic of the experience, I think, really comes in with that reading experience or that listening experience for me. I had it on audiobook, and it was narrated by Adjua Ando, and that was a really great narration, a performance more than anything else. And Feathers is kind of made, I think, even better by her kind of sidekick, for want of a better word, Lizzie, who is also fantastic. But yeah, Feathers is just such a well-written, well-formed larger than life rich character that she has to be my pick for that one. Okay, prompt number 4 then is beauty amidst pain. This one took a little bit of thinking about, but I think the one that is the most applicable to this prompt is a book called Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, a dangerous trans girl's confabulous memoir by Kai Cheng Tom. And this is a fictional memoir. This is, again, more magic realism. There's a lot of magic realism on this list, isn't there? But yeah, this one is quite a contemporary book. I'm not sure when it was written, but it's, within the last few years, really. And this tells the story of a young Asian trans girl who runs away from her parents' abusive home in a kind of gloomy city called Gloom. She strikes off on her own, and she finds a found family amongst a group of larger than life trans women who live in live and work in a mysterious kind of pleasure district known as the Street of Miracles. And within this found family, within this community, our protagonist kind of becomes the woman she's always dreamt of being. But one of their family is brutally murdered by transphobes, and she and other women in this group form a vigilante group, essentially. But things go horribly wrong, and she's forced to confront her own truth and, kind of grow up and find her place in the world and, find her place in her family, essentially. There is a lot of pain in this book. There is a lot of rage in this book. The protagonist she's filled with rage. There's a lot of reference to anger and rage and violent thoughts, and it's a difficult read at some points, but I think the magic realism, the kind of strange setting of it, kind of really helps with that. But at the heart of it is this this really positive evolution of the character, I think, and the finding of herself and her family. And it's beautifully told. I think that's the thing. The language is extremely lyrical. It's funny. It's really funny at times, darkly funny, very sharp humour. And it has kind of a split in terms of there are interludes, essentially, which are almost like poems that kind of, speak to certain themes. And then we kind of go back into the main narrative and you get another interlude and stuff. And it works really well. It's the structure of it, I think, is very strong. But yeah, there's definitely a fair amount of pain in this book, but as I say, it's like there's a lot of beauty in it as well. Okay, prompt number 5 is beauty in incompleteness. This one's a difficult one because it took me a long time to think of anything that I could consider even the slightest bit incomplete that I'd read. The only thing that I can come up with is The Silmarillion by Tolkien, because this was finished after his death. He wrote it, I believe, as a draft after The Hobbit was a success and kind of gave it to his publisher, and his publisher didn't want it at that point. So he put it in a drawer and wrote Lord of the Rings instead. And then after his death, his son, Christopher Tolkien, picked it up and edited it and added in some new stuff, had to devise some new material to kind of fill gaps and things like that. And then it was published in the late 70s. So that's kind of how I'm, sort of defining it as unfinished in Tolkien's lifetime. But yeah, I really like the Silmarillion. I'm not a huge fan of Tolkien's writing style when it comes to kind of the main stories of Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings in terms of I love the concept of it and I love the world and the world building, but the actual prose style and the storytelling, it's not necessarily my cup of tea. But it's the world building and the setting, all that kind of stuff that I can really tap into with the Silmarillion, because it is lore, you know. It is about building that world. It's a collection of you know, sort of myths, stories in varying styles. Like the first part of it is very much a creation myth, so it starts, you know, right at the beginning, the creation of the world, the universe that, you know, kind of Middle Earth is part of. And there's plenty of influences in there, as you'd expect with Tolkien, in terms of all the kind of mythologies like Celtic mythology, Norse mythology. And yeah, it reads for me much more like a kind of part history, part mythology, as I say, part creation myth. Um, and it's that element of it that I really like. I think it's a really beautiful telling. Particularly the first part, which I've listened to several times, because there's something about it. There's something about the rhythm of it, and the way that it's told, that I really, really enjoy. And I say I'm a sucker for lore. I might not always go for fantasy in terms of, like, you know, narrative storytelling, but if it's a good world, I can get sucked into the lore of it in a very kind of like history kind of way, much quicker, much easier. I get fascinated by it. So yeah, so the Silmarillion, I think, is my beauty in incompleteness pick. Okay then, prompt number 6 is beauty in place. I could have picked loads for this, because there's I've got plenty of books that have fabulous environment settings, and, you know, fabulously described, fabulously written environments. But I'm going to go for a non-fiction for this one, and I'm going to go for this one, The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. So here Shepherd describes her journey, or journeys really, into the Cairngorms Mountains in the Highlands of Scotland. And this was kind of, you know, a lifelong kind of project for Shepherd, to kind of discover the essence, essentially, of the Cairngorms, the essential nature of that region. It's beautifully written. It's some of the most beautiful nature writing I've ever read, and I can see how it's influenced some of my other favourites, like Robert Macfarlane, for sure. In fact, yeah, it's introduced by Robert Macfarlane in this. And yeah, I think you can see the influence of this on some of his stuff. But yeah, Shepherd's prose in it is really lyrical, really, really beautiful. It records so much detail about that region, both in terms of kind of, you know, geographical, geological, you know, flora and fauna and all that kind of stuff, but also just so much about the kind of hidden elements, I guess, of the landscape, and the philosophy that kind of Shepherd evolved throughout this kind of process of this exploration of that region, and, you know, her relationship with that landscape. I love this. This is absolutely brilliant. And now I've been to the Cairngorms and absolutely and utterly fallen in love with it myself. We're moving there as soon as we can, me and my wife. But yeah, I can see why this is so highly regarded, and it is an absolutely phenomenal, you know, kind of piece of writing on place. Okay, prompt number 7 then is beauty in time. For this one, I have gone with Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. It follows the experiences of Billy Pilgrim, his life from his early years to his time as an American soldier and prisoner of war in World War II, and the post-war years, and beyond. There's a lot to unpack in Slaughterhouse-Five, I think. But one of the things that I really loved about it, and loved about the storytelling from Vonnegut with this, was the jumping about in time. Billy becomes kind of unstuck in time as a result of his trauma in war, really. And so he travels backwards and forwards and around about in time throughout the novel, Vonnegut using a non-linear storytelling style. So we get stuff through flashbacks and description of time travel experiences, and all of this kind of reflects Billy's state of mind as well. And we get to meet the alien race, the Tralmaphadorians, I think they're called, who bring in a whole new sort of sense of a whole new idea of philosophy to Billy, different viewpoints on fate, free will, things like that. And it's just the way that Vonnegut structures the book was just so engaging to me, and I loved it for that. The science fiction stuff and the satire as well, but certainly the time travel science fiction stuff that came into this were a little kind of unexpected, I think, to me. Certainly in something I'd gone into knowing it only as a great anti-war novel, and it just really helped explore the themes for me. It was a really, really interesting way of exploring the themes of the book, and it was done beautifully. I think it's an absolutely fantastic book, and I'm kind of ashamed that it took me so long to read it. It was only last year that I actually read it for the first time. So yes, Slaughterhouse-Five, absolutely brilliant with its time travel. Okay, prompt number 8 then is Beauty in Catharsis. This one is a tricky one. I'm kind of going with the sort of, psychological sort of meaning of catharsis, as in, an experience that lets us kind of understand, express, release strong emotions. And so it's quite an intense feeling, I think, quite an intense experience, a cathartic experience. And I don't think I've ever really read a fiction book that has given me that kind of level of emotional reaction. I think non-fiction I've come closer, like sort of creative non-fiction or like memoir, that kind of thing, where I've really related to the experience of the author of that particular book, their life story, their experiences. Probably come closer on that. Especially on some books by trans authors that I read when I was much younger and I'm still figuring stuff out myself. I think probably the closest to a cathartic experience would be with some plays, but in performance as opposed to being read as scripts. I can see the potential for that kind of powerful ending on the page when I read them, but I wouldn't necessarily experience it. But I have then experienced something much closer when I've seen those in performance on the stage, as they should be seen, as they should be experienced, really, in my view. And I think the strongest one for this is my favourite play, Weldon Rising, by Phyllis Nage. This is quite a strange play set in the 1990s in New York's meatpacking district, and it tells the story of a group of characters, all of which are dealing with guilt, because of what is kind of described as the crime of inaction. They didn't do enough to try and prevent or help after one of their number essentially was murdered in a homophobic murder. The main character, if you like, Natty, it was his boyfriend Jimmy who was murdered. And this group of characters that are left, you've got Natty and a lesbian couple who live, overlooking the street where the murder happened, and Marcel, who's a transvestite prostitute who's kind of working the street corner. They are all dealing with this guilt over their inaction, and it's the ending of the play is a crescendo, in so many ways. It is their own catharsis. It is their own understanding of their own place in that kind of moment in time, and they're coming to terms with it, and their relationships to one another. And their kind of ascension above this kind of this guilt, this feeling. And as I say, yeah, it's a crescendo of emotion, but it's a crescendo in terms of the actual staging of it as well. You've got kind of Donna Summer, blaring on the sound system. You've got really bright light flashes as well. You've got quite a frenetic sort of stage effects going on. It's kind of it's kind of apocalyptic in a lot of respects, and on stage, that's quite powerful. I directed that when I was a final year student, and I don't think even I was prepared for quite how powerful that was going to be. I found it really powerful every time I saw it. But what was really good to see was that actually the rest of the audience seemed to experience that as well. There was barely a dry eye in the house each night that it was on, and people kind of came out looking quite wrung out, but quite energized as well. And I think that's probably as close to kind of catharsis as I can get, I would say. But yeah, Weldon Rising, it doesn't work in the same way on the page. It's definitely one of those experiences for me where it has to be all of the elements coming together on the stage to create that effect. And it has to be at the end of this build that goes on over the sort of the 80-90 minutes of the play. So there you go, there's my pick for that, Weldon Rising by Phyllis Nage. Not necessarily the written text, but yeah, the written text in the form it should be experienced in. Okay, the only thing left to do then is to tag some of the booktubers. So I will tag Dave and Olive over at Book Blather, MJ at Reading This Life, and The Mild Rumpus this time around. So yes, it's an interesting one, this one. It certainly made me think, this one. So if any of you folks like the sound of this and fancy jumping on board, then please do. So that will do from me today, folks. Thank you very much for watching, as always. Do drop your thoughts in the comments below. It's always lovely to hear from you. I will be back in the week with yet another tag. Say I'm catching up on tags. So I do hope you will join me for that then. But from me, for now, that's ta-ra.